When tech billionaire Adrian Chen discovers that his dying mother, whom he's hated for 5 years, has been secretly working as a night janitor in his building just to be close to him, his high school sweetheart returns with a letter revealing the heartbreaking truth about his father's death. But before we continue this emotional journey, don't forget to hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. Adrian Chen sat in his corner office on the 50th floor of the Chen Technologies building, staring at the skyline of downtown Los Angeles. At 40 years old, he had everything money could buy: designer suits, luxury cars, and a penthouse that looked like something out of a magazine. But he didn't have what mattered most: family. The phone on his desk rang. His secretary's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Chen, there's a call from County General Hospital about your mother." Adrian's jaw tightened. He hadn't spoken to his mother, Linda, in 5 years, not since that terrible night when he'd confronted her about his father's suicide. "Tell them I'm not available," he said coldly. "Sir, they say it's urgent. Your mother is very ill." Adrian's fingers drummed on his desk. After a long moment, he picked up the phone. "This is Adrian Chen. Mr. Chen, this is Sophie Martinez from County General." The voice was gentle, feminine, and somehow familiar. "I'm calling about your mother, Linda. She doesn't have much time left and she's asking for you." Adrian let out a harsh laugh. "Let her die alone, just like she left my father." He was about to hang up when Sophie spoke again. "Adrian, it's me, Sophie Williams from Lincoln High, remember?" Adrian's hand froze on the receiver. Sophie Williams, his high school girlfriend. The girl he'd loved before money and success changed everything. The girl who'd known his family when they were happy. "Sophie?" His voice softened slightly. "You're a nurse now?" "Yes, I am." "And Adrian, there's something you need to know about your mother. Something she never told you." "I know everything I need to know," Adrian cut in. "She gambled away our money. She drove Dad to kill himself. End of story." "No, that's not what happened at all." Sophie's voice was firm. "Your mother has been working as a night janitor in your building for the past 3 years. Did you know that?" Adrian sat up straight. "What?" "She takes the night shift so you won't see her. She cleans your office every night at 2 a.m. She dusts your awards and straightens the photos on your desk. She just wanted to be close to you." "Why would she?" Adrian's voice trailed off. "Because she loves you, and because she's been carrying a secret that's eating her alive." Sophie paused. "I have a letter from her. She wrote it last week when she knew she was dying. Will you at least read it?" Adrian closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Sunday dinners when he was young, his mother's smile, the way she used to hug him and tell him he could do anything he set his mind to. "Bring it," he said quietly. "But I'm not promising anything." "I'll be there in an hour," Sophie replied. After hanging up, Adrian walked to his window. Far below, the city stretched out like a glittering carpet. He'd built an empire, but something inside him felt hollow. And now his mother was dying, and his high school sweetheart was about to walk back into his life with a letter that might change everything. The intercom buzzed again. "Sir, your 2 o'clock meeting is waiting." "Cancel it," Adrian said. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day." He sat down heavily in his chair, picking up a framed photo from his desk. It showed his family 15 years ago, before the gambling, before the debt, before his father's death. They were smiling. At a backyard barbecue, his mother's arm around his shoulders, his father manning the grill. Had he been wrong all these years? The thought made his stomach clench. He'd built his success on anger, on proving his mother wrong, on showing her what he could become without her toxic influence in his life. But if Sophie was telling the truth, if his mother had been cleaning his office every night just to be near him, Adrian put his head in his hands, waiting for Sophie and the letter that would turn his world upside down. An hour later, Sophie Martinez stood in Adrian's office, looking exactly like she had in high school. Warm brown eyes, gentle smile, and that way of looking at him like she could see right through his expensive suit to the person he used to be. "You look good, Adrian," she said, smoothing her nurse's uniform. "Success suits you." "Let's not do the small talk," Adrian replied, but his voice wasn't as harsh as he'd intended. "You said you had a letter." Sophie pulled an envelope from her bag. It was wrinkled like it had been written and rewritten many times. "Before you read it, there's something you should know. Your mother didn't want me to tell you she was sick. I'm breaking hospital rules by being here." "Then why did you come?" "Because I was there 10 years ago, when everything happened. I saw what your mother did to protect you, and I can't watch you hate her for something that was never her fault." Adrian took the envelope. His mother's handwriting was shaky, nothing like the strong, sure hand that had signed his school permission slips and written encouraging notes in his lunchbox. "Dear Adrian," he read aloud, his voice growing quieter with each word. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. There are things you need to know about the night your father died, things I should have told you years ago." He sat down hard in his chair as he read about the loan sharks who had threatened his life over his failed first business venture, how his mother had borrowed money to protect him, how his father had taken out extra life insurance, knowing what he planned to do. "They came to the house," the letter continued. "They said they would hurt you if we didn't pay. Your father couldn't bear the thought of them hurting his son. The insurance money was the only way he saw to save you. I let you hate me because I thought it was better than you hating yourself." Adrian's hands were shaking. "Is this true?" he asked Sophie. "Every word. I was there the night the loan sharks came. I saw your mother beg them for more time. She wasn't gambling, Adrian. She was trying to save your life. But why didn't she tell me? All these years? Because she's your mother. She would rather lose your love than see you carry that guilt." Sophie moved closer, putting a hand on his shoulder. "She's been working as a janitor here just to make sure you're okay. She keeps a scrapbook of every newspaper article about you. She's so proud of what you've become." Adrian stood up suddenly, grabbing his coat. "Which hospital?" "County General, room 412. "But Adrian," Sophie caught his arm. "She's very weak. The cancer has spread everywhere. The doctors say she has days, maybe hours. I have to see her. I have to tell her." His voice broke. "God, Sophie, what have I done? 5 years. I wasted 5 years, hating her for something she didn't do." "Then don't waste another minute," Sophie said softly. They rode to the hospital in Adrian's Ferrari, the same car he'd bought to prove he wasn't the poor kid from the wrong side of town anymore. Now it just felt empty, like all the trappings of wealth he'd surrounded himself with. In the elevator, Sophie squeezed his hand like she used to do before his big basketball games in high school. "She loves you, Adrian." She never stopped. The doors opened to the cancer ward, and Adrian Chen, the man who had built a tech empire, felt like a scared little boy. Down the hall was his mother, the woman he'd refused to see or speak to for 5 years, the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect him. "Room 412, Sophie said quietly. "Do you want me to come with you?" Adrian shook his head. "I need to do this alone." He walked down the hall, his expensive shoes silent on the hospital floor. Through the window, he could see a frail figure in the bed, her gray hair spread on the pillow. His mother, the woman who used to dance with him in the kitchen while making Sunday breakfast, the woman who had worked nights cleaning his office just to be close to him. Adrian took a deep breath and opened the door. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Linda Chen looked so small in the big hospital bed, nothing like the strong woman who had raised him. Her eyes were closed, her face pale against the white pillowcase. "Mom?" Adrian's voice cracked on the word. Linda's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she looked confused, as if she thought she was dreaming. Then her face lit up with a smile that erased years of pain. "Adrian, is it really you?" He rushed to her bedside, taking her thin hand in his. Her skin felt like paper, and tubes ran from her arm to machines that kept track of her failing heart. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, tears running down his face. "I didn't know. All these years I didn't know." Linda reached up with a shaking hand to touch his cheek. "My beautiful boy, you came. Why didn't you tell me the truth? About Dad? About the loan sharks? About everything?" "Because you were finally happy," she said softly. "You were building your company, becoming successful. I didn't want to burden you with the past. But you've been cleaning my office every night. Why?" A small smile crossed Linda's face. "Just to see your awards, your photos, to straighten your desk and make sure everything was perfect for you each morning. It made me feel close to you." Adrian broke down sobbing, his head resting on the hospital bed. Linda stroked his hair like she used to when he was a little boy. "I saw you speak at that technology conference last month," she said proudly. "I sat in the back of the hall. You were so confident, so smart, just like your father. You were. There, I've been to every public event, always in the back, always quiet, but so proud, so very proud." The door opened and Sophie came in with a nurse who needed to check Linda's vital signs. While they waited in the hallway, Adrian noticed a worn backpack in the corner of the room. "That's your mother's," Sophie explained. "She keeps her most precious things in there." Inside, Adrian found a scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings about him. Every success, every achievement, carefully preserved. There were also old photos, his graduation, his first business award, even pictures taken from a distance at public events. His mother had documented his entire life from afar, loving him silently while he hated her. The other nurses found her looking at that book every night, Sophie said. She never missed a single article about you. When she got the cancer diagnosis 6 months ago, she refused treatment at first, said she couldn't afford it. She was saving every penny from her cleaning job to help you if those loan sharks ever came back. Adrian wiped his eyes. I have to make this right. I have to... Mr. Chen, the nurse stepped out. Your mother is asking for you. Back inside, Linda seemed even weaker, but her eyes were bright. Adrian, I need to tell you something important. About your father. Mom, you don't have to... Please, I need you to understand. Your father loved you so much that last night he told me his life insurance would solve everything. He said, Linda, we've given our son wings. Now we have to make sure he can fly. She squeezed Adrian's hand. I was so proud of your dreams. He knew you would succeed. But I blamed you. I said such horrible things to you. Shh, Linda soothed. You didn't know, and I would rather have you hate me than hate yourself. A mother can bear anything to protect her child. Adrian looked at the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, her happiness, her reputation, even his love, just to keep him safe. All the wealth he'd accumulated, all the success he'd achieved, felt hollow compared to the depth of her love. I'm going to take care of you, he promised. The best doctors, the best treatments. Linda shook her head slightly. It's too late for that, my dear. But you're here now. That's all I wanted. To see you one last time, to tell you how much I love you. Outside the room, Sophie watched through the window as mother and son began to heal 5 years of hurt. She saw Adrian pull his chair closer to the bed, saw Linda's face light up as he started telling her about his life, his work, all the things she'd only been able to observe from a distance. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the hospital room in warm golden light. In that moment, there was no bitterness, no regret, just a mother and son finding their way back to each other, making every remaining moment count. The next few days brought dramatic changes to County General's Room 412. Gone were the standard-issue hospital blankets, replaced with soft, warm quilts. Fresh flowers arrived every morning. A comfortable recliner appeared for Adrian, who now spent every night by his mother's bedside. You don't have to stay, Linda protested one evening, watching Adrian cancel another business meeting on his phone. Your company needs you. You need me more, Adrian replied firmly. The company can wait. Sophie, who often checked on them during her shifts, saw a different side of Adrian emerging. The cold, successful businessman was becoming the warm, caring person she'd known in high school. She watched him helping his mother eat, telling her stories about his work, listening eagerly to memories of his childhood. One night while Linda slept, Sophie found Adrian in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of coffee. Penny for your thoughts, she asked, sitting down across from him. I keep thinking about all the time I wasted, he said. 5 years, Sophie, 5 years of hating her while she cleaned my office every night. How do I make up for that? You're here now. That's what matters to her. Adrian looked at Sophie, really looked at her for the first time since she'd brought him the letter. You knew the truth all along, didn't you? That's why you stayed in touch with my mother. Sophie nodded. I was there that night, remember? When the loan sharks came to your parents' house. I was studying for finals with you in your room. We heard the shouting. I remember thinking it was another fight about Mom's gambling. Adrian shook his head. I was so wrong. Your mother made me promise not to tell you. She said you were finally building your dreams, and she wouldn't let the past hold you back. Before Adrian could respond, a nurse rushed into the cafeteria. Mr. Chen, your mother's asking for you. They hurried back to room 412. Linda was awake, looking anxious. Adrian, I thought you'd left. No, Mom. I'm right here. He took her hand. I'm not going anywhere. Linda relaxed, then noticed Sophie. A knowing smile crossed her face. Just like old times, she said softly. My two favorite young people. Sophie blushed, remembering how Linda used to invite her to stay for dinner, how she'd treated Sophie like a daughter during those years she and Adrian dated. Even after Adrian moved away to build his company, Linda had kept in touch, sending Sophie Christmas cards and attending her nursing school graduation. Remember when you two won the science fair? Linda asked, her voice weak but happy. Adrian's father stayed up all night helping you build that solar-powered car. Adrian felt tears in his eyes. Dad was so excited when it actually worked. He always believed in you, Linda said. Both of us did, even when you stopped believing in us. The monitors beeped steadily as Linda told stories about Adrian's childhood, stories he'd forgotten or pushed away during his years of anger. Sophie listened, adding her own memories of high school days spent at the Chen house, study sessions that turned into family dinners, weekend movies where Linda would make her famous caramel popcorn. Later that night, after Linda had fallen asleep, Adrian walked Sophie to her car. "Thank you," he said, "for staying with her all these years, for bringing me that letter. She never gave up on you, Adrian. And..." Sophie hesitated, then continued, "Neither did I." Their eyes met in the dim parking lot light. For a moment, Adrian felt like he was 17 again, walking Sophie home after a study session full of dreams and possibilities. A text message broke the moment, another crisis at his company demanding attention. But for the first time in years, Adrian realized that success meant nothing without people to share it with. "Sophie," he called as she opened her car door, Would you have breakfast with me tomorrow? Before your shift, there's this diner Mum used to take us to. Joe's Diner on 4th Street. Sophie smiled. "They still make those blueberry pancakes you loved. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow." As Sophie drove away, Adrian looked up at the hospital. Windows. His mother's room light was still on, a beacon in the darkness. He'd spent 5 years building an empire of wealth and power, but now he was discovering that true riches had been there all along, in his mother's unwavering love, in Sophie's loyal heart, in the simple joy of coming home to people who cared about him. He just hoped he had enough time to make things right. The next morning at Joe's Diner, Adrian and Sophie sat in a booth by the window, just like they used to in high school. The place hadn't changed. Same checkered tablecloths, same coffee-stained menus, same smell of bacon and maple syrup. "Your mother used to bring me here after you left," Sophie said, stirring her coffee. "Every Sunday. For years. She said it helped her feel close to you." Adrian put down his fork. "She did? She wanted to know everything about your life. I'd show her news articles about your company. She kept track of every success, every milestone." Sophie hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The night cleaning job wasn't her only connection to you." "What do you mean?" Sophie pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. It was his mother wearing a gardener's uniform, tending to the flowers outside his office building. "She took care of those roses you see from your office window every morning at dawn before anyone arrived. She knew they were your favorite." Adrian remembered complimenting those roses to his building manager just last month. "I had no idea. There's more." Sophie swiped to another photo. Linda was sitting in the back row of a conference hall, barely visible. "This was at your keynote speech last year. She attended every public event where you spoke. Always in disguise, always in the back." Tears filled Adrian's eyes. "She heard every speech? Every single one. She said you sounded just like your father, so passionate about technology and innovation." The waitress brought their blueberry pancakes, but Adrian couldn't eat. His mind was spinning with all the ways his mother had been present in his life, loving him from a distance while he nursed his anger. Back at the hospital, Linda was having a good morning. Her color was better, and she was sitting up in bed looking at old photos with a nurse. "Adrian," she brightened when he walked in. "Look what I found in my bag. Your 5th grade science project, the one that won first place." The photo showed young Adrian standing proudly next to a volcano model. His father's hand was on his shoulder, and his mother was beaming beside them. "Dad stayed up all night helping me paint it," Adrian remembered, "and you made 30 cupcakes for my class." 32, Linda corrected with a smile. "Extra ones for the teachers." Sophie watched from the doorway as mother and son continued sharing memories. The nurse pulled her aside with a concerned look. "Her vitals are getting weaker," the nurse whispered. "The doctor wants to speak with Mr. Chen about hospice options." Sophie felt her heart sink. She watched Adrian laughing with his mother, finally reunited, finally healing old wounds. How could she tell him their time was running out? Later that afternoon, while Linda napped, Adrian explored the contents of her worn backpack more thoroughly. He found pay stubs from her cleaning job, carefully organized, bank statements showing regular deposits to a savings account. He did the math. She'd been saving almost every penny she earned. Confused, he showed the statements to Sophie. "She was saving it for you," Sophie explained softly, "in case those loan sharks ever came back. She wanted to make sure she could protect you again. But she needed that money for treatment," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "The doctor said if they'd caught the cancer earlier, she wouldn't spend it." Said your safety was more important than anything else. Adrian stood by the window, looking down at the rose garden his mother had tended every morning. How many sunrises had she watched, working quietly to make his world more beautiful? How many times had she stood in the shadows, proud of his success but unable to share in it? A soft voice came from the bed. "Adrian, is everything okay?" He turned to find his mother watching him with concerned eyes, still worrying about him even now. "Mom," he said, sitting beside her, "why didn't you use the money for treatment? Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" Linda took his hand. "Because you were finally free, my son. Free from the past, from the pain, from those men who threatened you. I couldn't bear to be a burden again." "You were never a burden," Adrian said fiercely. "Never. I was the one who failed you. I was so wrapped up in my own anger, my own success." "No," Linda interrupted. "You became exactly what your father and I always knew you could be. We gave you wings, remember? And look how high you've flown." Sophie slipped quietly from the room, leaving mother and son to their precious time together. But as she walked down the hall, she could hear Linda's proud voice sharing another memory, another piece of the past finally falling into place. Outside, the roses Adrian's mother had planted were blooming, their petals catching the afternoon sun. Soon they would have to tell him about her declining condition, about the difficult decisions ahead. But for now, there was only love, forgiveness, and the gentle healing of time. Dr. Marcus, the head oncologist, stood before the whiteboard in his office, drawing diagrams that Adrian struggled to understand. Words like metastasized and terminal progression hung in the air like heavy weights. "Mr. Chen," the doctor said gently, "your mother's condition is deteriorating rapidly. We need to discuss hospice care." Adrian gripped the arms of his chair. "But she seemed better yesterday. She was sitting up, talking, sharing stories. Those moments of improvement are temporary. The cancer has spread too far. At this point, our goal is to keep her comfortable." Sophie, who had taken her lunch break to be with Adrian during the consultation, reached over and squeezed his hand. The gesture reminded him of their breakfast at Joe's diner, of all the memories they'd been sharing. "How?" Adrian's voice cracked. "How long does she have?" "Days," Dr. Marcus said softly. "Perhaps a week at most." Back in Linda's room, Adrian found his mother sleeping peacefully. Her face was thinner than ever, but there was a small smile on her lips. He sat beside her bed, taking her fragile hand in his. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "Not when I just found you again." Linda's eyes fluttered open. "Adrian, what did the doctor say?" He tried to speak, but tears choked his words. "Ah," Linda said, understanding in her eyes. "That bad? Mom, I'm sorry if I hadn't been so stubborn, if I'd known sooner about your illness." "No regrets," Linda said firmly. "We have now. That's what matters." She patted the bed beside her. "Come sit with me. There's something I want to give you." From under her pillow, she pulled out a small worn leather book. "Your father's journal. I've been saving it for the right moment." Adrian opened it with trembling hands. Inside, in his father's familiar handwriting, were entries spanning the last year of his life. "Read the last page," Linda urged. Adrian turned to the final entry, dated the night before his father died. "My son thinks his first business is failing. He doesn't know about the threats, about the dangerous men demanding money. Linda and I have decided the insurance money will save him. My boy has such dreams, such potential. A father's duty is to protect his child's future, no matter the cost. Linda will bear his anger, shield him from the truth. My brave, loving wife. Together, we've given our son wings. Now we must make sure he can fly." Tears fell onto the journal's pages. "Dad, he was so proud of you," Linda said. "Even at the end, he knew you would achieve great things." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sophie entered, carrying a laptop. "I thought you might want to see something," she said, setting up the computer. She played a video, security footage from Adrian's office building, dated just last week. In the grainy footage, Linda moved quietly through his office at 2 a.m., dusting his awards, straightening his papers. She stopped at his desk, picked up a photo of him from a magazine cover, and kissed it gently before putting it back. "She did this every night," Sophie explained. "The security guard said she would talk to your photo, telling you about her day, sharing how proud she was of your latest accomplishments." Adrian watched his mother move through the silent office, her love evident in every careful gesture. Even when he had shut her out completely, she had found ways to stay close, to care for him. "We need to talk about hospice," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "The doctor says..." I know, dear, Linda interrupted gently. I've known for a while, but look what I got first. My son back. A chance to tell you the truth. To see you and Sophie together again, just like the old days. She smiled at Sophie, who was wiping tears from her eyes. You'll take care of him for me, won't you? He forgets to eat when he's working too hard, and he needs someone to remind him to stop and smell the roses, the ones I planted for him. Mom, please, Adrian begged. Don't talk like that. It's okay, Linda said, squeezing his hand. I'm not afraid. I've lived to see my son become the man his father and I always knew he could be. I've seen him find his way back to love. She looked meaningfully at Sophie. What more could a mother want? Outside the hospital, the city lights were coming on, creating a golden glow against the darkening sky. In room 412, a mother, her son, and the woman who had brought them back together sat quietly, sharing memories, making peace with the precious time they had left. The next morning, Adrian's employees were shocked to see an email from their CEO. He was stepping back from daily operations indefinitely to care for his dying mother. Even more surprising was his announcement that he was creating a new company. Policy: unlimited paid family leave for employees caring for sick relatives. My mother worked as a night janitor in this building, he wrote. She cleaned my office every night for 3 years, just to be close to me. I never knew. I don't want anyone else to miss precious time with their family because of work. In the hospital, Linda had been moved to a private hospice room. Adrian had it filled with photos from happier times, family barbecues, birthday parties, his high school graduation. He even found an old picture of himself and Sophie at their senior prom, Linda beaming proudly beside them. Your father took that photo, Linda said, looking at the prom picture. He said you two reminded him of us when we were young. Sophie, who had switched to the day shift to spend more time with them, brought in a small CD player. Remember this song, Adrian? It was playing when you asked me to dance at prom. The gentle music filled the room and Linda watched with tears in her eyes as Adrian took Sophie's hand, swaying gently with her near the window. Just like old times, Linda whispered. Later that evening, while Linda slept, Adrian and Sophie walked to the hospital garden. The roses his mother had planted were in full bloom, their sweet scent filling the air. I'm selling the penthouse, Adrian said suddenly. What? Why? I bought my parents' old house, the one I grew up in. He turned to face her. Mom always loved that house. Even after everything that happened, she would drive by just to look at it. I want to restore it, make it a home again. Sophie's eyes softened. She'd love that. I want to start a foundation too, Adrian continued, to help families struggling with medical bills and debt. No one should have to choose between treatment and protecting their children. No one should have to clean offices at night just to be near their family. Adrian Chen, what happened to the ruthless businessman I heard so much about? Sophie teased gently. He remembered who he used to be, who his parents raised him to be. Adrian took her hand. Sophie, I know this might seem sudden, but these past few days have taught me what really matters. When Mom is, after she... He couldn't finish the sentence. I'll be here, Sophie promised. We'll get through it together. Back in the room, they found Linda awake, looking through Adrian's father's journal again. Did you know, she said softly, your father wrote in here about the day you were born. He said holding you was like holding a miracle. He knew right then that you would do amazing things. Adrian sat beside her bed. I want to do something amazing now, Mom. I want to help other families like ours, stop them from being torn apart by debt and secrets. Linda's face glowed with pride. You have your father's heart. I always knew it was in there, underneath. All that success. I had good teachers, Adrian said, looking at his mother and then at Sophie. I just forgot to listen for a while. That night, after Linda had fallen asleep again, Adrian found Sophie in the hallway looking at her phone. What is it? Your email about the new family leave policy is going viral, she said, showing him the screen. People are sharing their own stories about working multiple jobs to stay close to sick relatives. You've started something important. Adrian looked through the window at his sleeping mother. Even now, she was teaching him how to be a better person, how to lead with love instead of ambition. I wasted so much time being angry, he said, building walls, pushing people away. But Mom never gave up on me. She kept loving me even when I thought I hated her. Sophie put her arm around him. Love like that never dies, Adrian. It just waits patiently for us to remember it's there. As if in agreement, Linda smiled in her sleep, at peace in the knowledge that her son had finally found his way home. not to a penthouse full of expensive things, but to the truth about his family's love and sacrifice. The doctors said Linda only had days left, but she was determined to make each moment count. One morning, she asked Adrian to bring her laptop to the hospital. "I want to see your company," she said. "Show me everything you've built." Adrian spent hours showing her presentations, product launches, and news coverage of his success. Linda absorbed every detail, asking questions that surprised him with their insight. "You understand business better than I thought," Adrian said. Linda smiled weakly. "I used to listen to your meetings sometimes when I was cleaning. I learned so much about what you do. I was so proud, watching you lead those brilliant people." That afternoon, Linda asked Sophie to help her sit up. "I need to tell you both something important," she said. From her bedside drawer, she pulled out a stack of envelopes, birthday cards she'd written for Adrian but never sent, one for each year they'd been apart. Each contained a letter sharing her pride in his accomplishments, her unfading love, and her hopes for his future. "I want you to read these after," Linda's voice faltered, "after I'm gone. One each year, on your birthday." Adrian took the envelopes with trembling hands. "Mom, there's something else." She pulled out another envelope, this one addressed to Sophie. "This is the recipe for Adrian's favorite childhood meals, the way he likes his coffee. Little things a mother knows. He works too hard sometimes, forgets to take care of himself. Promise me you'll look after him." Sophie wiped tears from her eyes. "I promise." Later that evening, Linda asked to be wheeled out to the hospital garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her roses filled the air with their sweet scent. "Your father proposed to me in a garden like this," she told Adrian. "He said love was like these roses. It needs care and patience, but it blooms again and again." She looked meaningfully at Sophie, who was adjusting Linda's blanket. "Sometimes, hair just needs a second chance to grow." That night, Linda's breathing became more labored. The nurses increased her pain medication, but she fought to stay alert, determined to share one last story. "The day you were born," she told Adrian, her voice barely a whisper, "your father and I made a promise. We would love you enough for 10 lifetimes, support your dreams no matter the cost, give you wings to fly as high as you could imagine." She squeezed Adrian's hand. "We kept that promise. Through everything, we kept it." "I know, Mom," Adrian choked out. "I know now." Linda turned to Sophie. "When Adrian first brought you home in high school, I knew. I saw in you what I had with his father, that rare love that makes you stronger, better. Take care of each other." As the night deepened, Linda's strength began to fade, but she had one final request. "Read to me," she asked Sophie, "like you used to during your night shifts." Sophie picked up a worn copy of The Little Prince from Linda's bedside table. She began to read, her voice soft and steady. "What is essential is invisible to the eye." Adrian held his mother's hand as Sophie read, the familiar words filling the quiet room. Linda smiled, her eyes closed, listening to the story of a little prince who learned about love and sacrifice. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. Inside room 412, a mother who had sacrificed everything for love was finally at peace, surrounded by the two people she had never stopped believing in. The monitors beeped steadily, marking the precious moments as they slipped away. But in that room, time seemed to stand still, held in place by love that had endured through years of separation, through misunderstandings and pain, emerging stronger and purer than ever. Linda Chen passed away peacefully at 3:15 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning. She took her last breath as Sophie finished reading the final page of The Little Prince, her son's hand holding hers, a gentle smile on her face. The hospital room fell silent except for Adrian's quiet sobs. Sophie put down the book and held him as grief overtook him, her own tears falling silently. "She waited," Sophie whispered. "She waited until we finished the story." Dawn was breaking. Over Los Angeles, when the nurses came to take Linda away, Adrian stood at the window watching the sun rise over the city his mother had quietly moved through for so many years, loving him from a distance. "She used to see this same sunrise," he said softly, "every morning when she tended the roses." The next few days passed in a blur of funeral, arrangements and paperwork. Adrian insisted on having the service at his parents' old house, the one he'd just bought back. Workers rushed to prepare the backyard, planting fresh roses from the hospital garden along the fence. The morning of the funeral, Adrian found himself in his old bedroom, now empty, except for a few boxes of his mother's things. Sophie found him sitting on the floor going through one of the boxes. "Look at this," he said, holding up a newspaper clipping. It was his first major business success, the launch of his tech company. Written in his mother's handwriting on the margin were the words, "My brilliant boy," just like his father said he would be. There were hundreds of clippings like this, each with Linda's loving notes. Awards, interviews, product launches. She documented every triumph, celebrating silently from afar. The funeral drew an unexpected crowd. Along with business associates and hospital staff, came dozens of cleaning crew members from Adrian's office building, security guards who had chatted with Linda during her night shifts, and gardeners who had worked alongside her in the early mornings. One by one, they shared stories about Linda, how she always had a kind word and a smile, how she would talk about her son with such pride, how she never missed a day of work, even when she was starting to feel ill. "She loved telling us about your latest achievements," one of the security guards told Adrian. "She knew every detail of your company's success." The gardening supervisor added, "Those roses she planted, she said they had to be perfect because her son could see them from his office. She wanted your view to be beautiful." Adrian stood to speak, his voice shaking. "My mother taught me about love twice in my life. First, when I was young, through her daily care and sacrifice. Then again, at the end, when she showed me that true love never gives up, never stops believing, never asks for recognition or reward. She and my father gave everything to give me wings to fly. Now I understand the cost of those wings and the depth of their love." He looked at Sophie, who gave him an encouraging smile through her tears. "My mother's last gift to me wasn't just the truth about the past. It was helping me find my way back to the person I was meant to be, back to love." He held out his hand to Sophie, who joined him at the podium. With her last breaths, she shared her wisdom about second chances and the power of forgiveness. "She didn't just give me wings, she showed me how to use them to lift others up." After the service, Adrian and Sophie walked through the backyard, past the newly planted roses. The setting sun painted the sky in the same colors as that last evening in the hospital garden. "What do we do now?" Sophie asked softly. Adrian pulled out one of his mother's birthday cards, the first one he was meant to read after her passing. "We honor her legacy," he said. "We love the way she loved, completely, unconditionally, without asking for anything in return." As they stood there, a warm breeze carried the scent of roses through the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime played, the same kind Linda used to hang in this very garden years ago. "She's still here," Sophie said, squeezing his hand. "In every rose that blooms, in every sunrise, in every act of love that ripples out from her story." Adrian looked at his childhood home, thinking of all the memories it held, and all the new memories waiting to be made. Mom always said love was like her roses. With care and patience it blooms again and again. He turned to Sophie, the woman who had helped him find his way back to his mother's love, back to himself. In her eyes, he saw the promise of tomorrow, of love blooming anew from the rich soil of the past. 1 year later, the old Chen family home was transformed. The worn siding had been replaced, the garden restored to its former glory, and Linda's roses bloomed more beautifully than ever. But the biggest change wasn't to the house, it was to the building next door. The Chen Family Foundation headquarters stood where an abandoned warehouse once had, its modern glass walls reflecting the sunrise each morning. Inside, families gathered in comfortable meeting rooms, speaking with counselors about medical bills, debt relief, and emergency grants. Adrian stood in his office, adjusting the framed photo on his wall, the last picture taken of him with his mother in the hospital garden. Below it sat his father's journal and the stack of birthday cards from Linda, each to be opened in its own time. "Ready for the grand opening?" Sophie asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee, made exactly the way Linda had written in her recipe. "Note, almost." Adrian straightened his tie, not an expensive Italian silk one, but the simple blue tie his father had worn to his own wedding. "Did the nurses from County General arrive?" "They're all here, even Dr. Marcus came," Sophie smiled. "The first group of families is waiting in the main hall." The Chen Family Foundation's mission was simple, to prevent other families from being torn apart by medical debt and financial pressures. Each family would receive not just financial help, but also emotional support, career counseling, and legal assistance. In the main hall, Adrian took the podium. The room was filled with hospital staff, social workers, and families seeking help. On the wall behind him hung a large portrait of Linda and Richard Chen, smiling warmly at the crowd. My mother cleaned offices at night just to be near me, Adrian began. My father gave his life to protect me from consequences of my own mistakes. They taught me that love doesn't keep score, doesn't ask for recognition, doesn't stop believing even when faced with anger and rejection. He looked at Sophie, who had moved from nursing to running the Foundation's family support programs. They also taught me that second chances are possible, that it's never too late to heal old wounds, never too late to find your way back to love. The Foundation's first initiative was the Linda Chen Night Shift Fund, providing emergency grants to parents working multiple jobs to support their children. The Richard Chen Life Insurance Program helped families cope with the loss of a primary breadwinner. After the ceremony, Adrian and Sophie walked through the Foundation's garden, a beautiful space designed for families to find peace during difficult times. Linda's roses had been carefully transplanted here, surrounding benches where parents could sit and find hope. "I got something for you," Adrian said, leading Sophie to a quiet corner of the garden. A small fountain bubbled nearby, and the afternoon sun caught the spray of water, creating tiny rainbows. He pulled out a small, worn velvet box. "This was my mother's engagement ring. Dad gave it to her in a garden just like this one. She left it for me with a note that said, 'For when you're ready to bloom again.'" Sophie's eyes filled with tears. As Adrian knelt on one knee, "Sophie Martinez, you brought me back to my mother, back to myself, back to love. Will you help me honor their legacy? Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sophie whispered, as Adrian slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. 1,000 times yes. That night, they sat on the porch of the old Chen house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The Foundation building next door glowed softly, its windows warm with light and hope. "I opened Mum's next birthday card today," Adrian said, holding Sophie close. "She wrote about how love has the power to heal across time, across misunderstandings, across any distance. She said that when we love someone, we become part of their story forever." Sophie looked at her engagement ring, a simple, elegant band that had witnessed another great love story before this one. "Your mother knew we'd find our way back to each other." "She did," Adrian smiled. "Just like she knew I'd find my way back to her." Inside the house, wind chimes tinkled softly, the same ones Linda had loved so much. Adrian had found them in a box of her things and hung them in their old place. "Listen," Sophie said, "it's like she's telling us she approves." Adrian held her closer, thinking of all the lives they would touch through the Foundation, all the families they would help keep together. His mother's love hadn't just given him wings. It had taught him how to help others fly too. In the garden, Linda's roses bloomed under the stars, their sweet scent carrying on the evening breeze. Love, like these flowers, would continue to bloom season after season, touching life after life, carrying forward the legacy of a mother's silent pride and a love that never died. Daint vi.